Hey y'all, welcome to the My Place podcast. I'm your host, Mary McSwain. We have a very special guest with us on the podcast today. She is the mother of two. She has been married to her husband for over 34 years now. She is the co-author of the book Reality Check that she authored with her husband. And about 28 years ago now, she co-founded Place Ministries. That's right. You guessed it. Today, I'm joined by both my mom and my dad on the podcast today. Mom, thanks so much for joining us.
Mary, it is my absolute joy to be here with the two of you. I am just giddy right now. This is awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, and Mom, I'm sorry, darling.
Wife.
Glad to have you with us today. And I think, Mary, you're going to kind of lead it. Oh, that's a D saying drive, lead, but you're going to kind of direct us today, aren't you?
I am. I typically prefer facilitate.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Facilitate.
That's more of a
yes.
C personality word, right?
Correct. The drive and lead is more of a D. What would be for Mom? She's an S. What would be hers?
Gently guide us.
Gently guide
She would guide
alongside.
us, wouldn't
Guide us,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, she'd be guiding us if she was in charge today, but you're in charge, so.
I do have a question for y'all before we get started. Have y'all talked about what the other person has talked about?
Not at
No.
all.
No.
That's a lot of our relationship, a lot of times.
But it seems to work. We're going to talk about that a
Yes.
little bit today because I want to walk us back to some of the early years of your marriage and your ministry. Mom, I had you on the podcast a couple years ago. I think it was one of our earlier episodes. Dad, I'm pretty sure that you were out of town, which is why you let us take the reins. But we got to have a conversation about the early years of Place, your perspective and experience with co-founding it. Dad, of course, we talk a lot about your ministry with Place, with the Braves, with what you do at church. But what I wanted to talk to both of y'all about together is what your marriage and ministry has looked like together over the years, from the very beginning and in the 34 years since that. How has the Lord brought you together to do ministry together with one another, to one another, and for one another? So, Mom, I want to ask you, what did ministry look like for y'all in the early years?
I think the word that you've repeated right there in the introduction was together. We were together so much in the early years. We, would start our day together. We'd go to our jobs. We'd come back together. But then everything we planned was really together and how we were going to do ministry together. So I think that pretty much describes the first 10 years. Is we were together a lot and we were very like-minded, during that time.
And we didn't have kids together in those first 10 years either.
Yeah.
So the first 10 years of your marriage, to give everybody else context, you didn't have kids. Were you in full-time ministry though?
No, we weren't. I was working in the family business and Mom was working at AT&T. And so, no, and we'd been married about 3 years and we got involved with engaged couples. And from there, we moved into 1995 working with young single adults. So, and that really became full-time
Right.
for us.
Yeah.
I mean, Mom quit working at AT&T and in 1996-ish, I transitioned out of the family business, and that's when we started doing ministry full-time together.
And we've talked about that a little bit on the podcast. It was a couple of episodes ago where we talked about a lot of your story and you walked us through what y'all's marriage looked like. You were in Atlanta, you were both working, but you were doing singles ministry and the engaged couples ministry at Rehoboth. And then you moved out to San Francisco, and that's where you became full-time volunteers at Golden Gate Seminary, which is now Gateway Seminary.
Yeah.
And then you moved to Oklahoma.
Where you and I have got to both teach together.
Yes. So full circle moment right there for us.
Yes, it is.
But before we get to Oklahoma, which was a bit of a marker in y'all's life and in your ministry, I want to talk about those first 10 years and just what you saw in each other So, Dad, what would you say are some of the strengths that you saw in Mom and y'all's relationship and other people's relationships that she had, and even in your ministry together?
Well, I think what I saw was we we didn't date a long time before we got married, but it was in the very, very early part. I remember a Wednesday night, she told me that it wasn't real good that I'd be sitting on the front row singing with my hand in my pockets with change going up and down. And so she saw that, and things like, you're too handsome to not have a umbrella on it, like it's raining today, and then I still don't have an umbrella. But no, all that aside, what I saw was she complimented me, uh, where I was strong, she wasn't. Where she was strong, I wasn't. And I'll never forget, I still have the book. It's called Opposites Attract slash Attack. And I guess we've had some of both of those, but we really worked well together. I mean,
Yeah.
all no joking aside, we
Yeah.
really have done well in complementing each other in ministry.
Mom, what would you say are some of those ways that y'all complement one another?
I think about our home that we still live in, that you and your sister grew up in. But I think about the opportunities we had for the singles. We had them over at the house every Friday night, and we had Bible study and food and fellowship. But the way we complimented each other is Dad would always meet everybody at the door. I would be in the kitchen, and I would just wait for someone to come to the kitchen who might need me or might want to talk. Um, but those same nights, your dad literally would say, "Good night, y'all. I'm going on to bed. Y'all stay as long as you want." But I would be the last one to leave. And I would walk the last person out the door, stand on the porch and watch them drive off. And then I could shut down the house and everything, was ready for the next day. So, your dad was more up front. I was behind the scenes. He was greeting, and I was just waiting for someone who might need something.
And that's something that happened pretty naturally for
It was,
y'all too.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely
it was
natural.
real. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
didn't like we had to say, no, you'll do this and I'll do that. We
Mm-hmm.
just did what kind of came again, that word most natural to each of us.
And that was at y'all's house in Atlanta
Yes.
before you moved out to San Francisco, where you became full-time volunteers.
Yeah.
Did your ministry together look any different? Were there different dynamics when you moved out there and you are now in full-time ministry together?
Well, your mom used to always say that if I ever kicked over, that she was going to stay there forever.
I did.
And I remember the president saying, well, what do we need to do to facilitate that? I remember him saying that. But I, it did complement. We at our church, we did a lot of premarital coaching together.
We stayed in a singles ministry lane for a little
Yeah,
bit.
we did
And
all the
yeah.
for the pastor, everybody that would get married in the church that we were part of, we
Mm-hmm.
got to do the premarital
Yeah.
coaching. We shared an office together, and it did have a beautiful view
Yeah.
looking out over the bay. But I truthfully though, it was more she was the lead there because she was Miss Everything. I've reminded the president who came after the president that we were there and was there over 20 years, who was on my board and I was on his board. I've laughed with him several times that mom has spoken in chapel. I never have. She was there. She did ministry to girls. She started a family fun night there. She got to kind of be the fill-in for the president with the other seminary wives. She did. I mean, she started a prayer ministry that was really cool. So really, she was a lot more visible at the seminary than I was in those days.
And that's because you were doing a research project
Yeah.
and was really focused in his office. And I was out and about being social and meeting people. But the only reason I got to do those things is because the Lord and Jay led me there.
As she
Yeah.
likes to say, she hitched her wagon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's something that is, I do say often about myself, whether it's through my spiritual gifts or even my personality, is I am a co-captain. And I want to be the best co-captain that you have ever had. I want you to want me to be your co-captain. And so I have hitched my wagon to your dad from 4 months after we met on a blind date. And he's led me to some amazing places that I would not have ever been able to go by myself. Didn't have the confidence, didn't have the skills, but I do believe that I have had a chance to kind of fill in the gap. I've thought about it. And you talk about this with place sometimes in the teaching, and you have as well, the Paul and Barnabas. So Paul, with his personality, is out in front. He's leading, and Barnabas is in the back of the room, watching and observing and both listening to Paul, but watching the crowd to see who may need something. Or did Paul say something that offended somebody? Oh, I better go talk to them afterwards. And, even from our singles ministry days, right after we got married, year 3 or 4, that's a lot of what I did. His vision, his idea, his desire and heart for that group of 20-something-year-olds, he led the way. And I didn't just watch, but I just tried to bring things to his attention or step up where I saw things needed to be done. Um, whether I hitched my wagon or was the caboose, either one, because he has a way of being the engine and having a lot of people follow him, a lot of cars on the train. And we all get to where he feels he and God want them to be. But I'm very comfortable being the caboose. I don't want to leave anybody behind.
Now, I have to make a quick sidebar really quick off of something you said, just
Okay.
in case people thought they heard it but missed it. 4 months, right? Met and married in 4 months?
We don't recommend it, okay?
That's what I've heard
But
as
it
well.
worked for us.
To our single daughter who just started dating someone
We're not
about 2
going there.
months ago.
Mm-mm.
Okay, but
Yeah, we're not going
yeah.
there.
So, y'all heard it from the source. They don't recommend 4 months.
No.
However, the Lord has blessed them since. They've
Mhm.
now been married for over 34 years,
Yeah.
and they have done so much ministry together in and through their marriage to one another and to other people, which is why we're talking about it here today. But I just had to throw that out there in case someone heard it and was not sure if they heard that
Yeah.
right. But I knew that's what you always say when I ask you about it. But as you were talking, as
Mhm.
both of y'all were talking, really, you used a language that we talk a lot about here in the My Place podcast with Place Ministries. And I have an ear for it because I grew up around it and it's a language that we use. But a lot of the different words that y'all used are in relation to your spiritual gifts.
Mm-hmm.
And I have an ear for that. Some of our viewers, if y'all have been here for a while, you might be picking up on some things because y'all's roles in the way that you have served with one another are not just in relation to your role as a husband and a wife, but also in relation to how the Lord has gifted you, how the Lord has wired you. So after y'all were in San Francisco, you moved to Oklahoma, and that is where you wrote and co-founded Place Ministries. Before that, did you have a language for personality and spiritual gifts?
No, we really didn't. I mean, we might have talked about I was driven and she was always helping whatever needed, but I don't think until we really started putting together Place, I mean, that we
Yeah.
wouldn't have we would not have talked in the PLACE language.
Right.
Even though, as I look back at it, you asked that question, I never even thought about that till
Mhm.
now.
Mhm.
I would say we lived out PLACE. I mean, the principles, the teachings that we are so passionate about
Mhm.
now, we were living them out before we had the language that went with it.
Right. And I believe that started in the singles ministry, where you got your life verse. You and the Lord spent some time together. You got that life verse, and you started plugging people in and giving them a purpose. I I believe our language. I remember one day we were driving to church, and we had gone through a personality assessment in maybe in our newlyweds class or in a class, and I was getting a little nervous because we only dated 4 months, and I got to thinking, do I really know my husband? Like, do I really know him? So one day driving to church, I took the personality assessment and I started to answer it based on the way I thought he would answer it. And I was so happy to see that I knew my husband. And this could have been a few years into our marriage. But I did know my husband, and that through our personality. And that was fulfilling and affirming. But I did, before meeting your dad, in the singles ministry at the same church where we met at, but I didn't know him then, but I was in the singles ministry there, and we did a spiritual gift assessment one time, and I was kind of excited about it. It was new, it was different. I grew up in the church. I had never heard of spiritual gifts, so I was pretty curious. So I took the assessment and I looked at it and I thought, this can't be right. I don't like this. This can't be right. One, it says my spiritual gift is pastor shepherd. And I'm thinking, I'm a girl. I'm a female. I can't have the spiritual gift of shepherding. That's what a man does. And then the second gift that I scored high in was the gift of helps. And I'm like, I don't want to come in here by myself and set up a bunch of chairs. I don't want to be alone. I want to be with people. So I just discounted that. But I think it's interesting, and it's a God wink, maybe in the sense that I still remember that 36, 37 years later, because, and it's maybe a testimony to how place and the spiritual gift assessments, and really all the assessments, are often misused. They're given as information and as a help, but if you're not told what it really means, then you just discount it and move on because that's not the way I was raised or that's not what I understand. So in the early years, in the first 10 years or so, did I have an understanding? It was more on our personalities, maybe our love language, a lot of those resources and teachings that newlyweds and young couples get from their church or they go seek out on their own through reading or books. But rolling into the other elements of place and specifically spiritual gifts, no, w- we didn't really, we didn't know what we were doing. We were just doing we had the opportunity just to follow where the Lord led us.
I think there is so much insight in what both of y'all just said. What you just said, Mom, about the misuse and misunderstanding of
Mm-hmm.
assessments when they're not given context, when they're not given explanation,
Mm-hmm.
and even when they're given by themselves. Because, and you spoke to it just to give it away for everybody, you have the gift of Pastor Shepherd and
Mm-hmm.
helps. Dad, your top two gifts are hospitality and leadership. So
Mm-hmm.
if y'all go back through this episode with that in mind, you might be able to pick up on some of the language that they used, but they weren't saying this is my spiritual gift. It was the language through which they spoke, which is a reflection of the gifts that the assessment reflects in their life. But Mom, what you said, and Dad, even what you said, you were living it out without realizing it,
Mm-hmm.
but you were able to see how you were you were living it out because you had all the context, you had the whole picture. You didn't just have one piece of the puzzle, just your personality or just your spiritual gifts, because with your gift of helps, your personality is very social. and
Mhm.
you like to be around people.
Mhm.
You always say people are more important than things.
Absolutely.
So if you look at your gift of helps and you're only doing a task, you're not going to feel fulfilled in that. But
Mhm.
if you look at your personality and your spiritual gifts and you get to help people,
Mhm.
that's going to be a lot more fulfilling for
Yes.
you. And so you spoke, both of y'all throughout this episode have spoken through the lens of your gifting, which is what we talk about all the time. But you made a great point that you didn't need necessarily the language to live out how the Lord had created you, but you said it was affirming when you finally did see. It was
Mhm.
affirming and encouraging when you did, and not only for yourself, but even for one another. And that's what I also wanted to talk to y'all about, is how knowing not just your own spiritual gifts has impacted your ministry, but also knowing the spiritual gifts of your spouse.
Can I make one comment about that? While we didn't have the language and know, when I wrote this, it's very interesting. When I wrote this, the very first benefit that I put in here was that if you understand yourself, you'll have the ability to evaluate ministry opportunities.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I have seen is that when opportunities have come our way, we've been able to now, without having to get in them and be disappointed or figure out I'm in the wrong place. You're being I know our pastor's wife had a meeting with you last week about
Mhm.
something, and because you know what your gifts are and you know what they're not, you told her where you could step in and help, but you also told her where you would not be
Yeah.
gifted administration to be able to support her.
I
So that's the value though of what we do now, is that we help people leverage to the best that they can
Mhm.
be without having to have the guesswork of should I step into this role, should I not? So that we stepped in it, it worked out good for
Yeah.
us, but a lot of times people step into roles and it doesn't work out so good for them because they're really not using the gifts in the way God wired them.
I have to say I've been giggling over here because when I met with our pastor's wife and we talked, it would be actually be our second meeting for this particular ministry idea she has. And so I told her, I said, to get this started, I do not have the gift of administration. I have tried to do it. I frustrate everybody. I make things too hard. She said, that's okay. That's my top gift. So it was just when you're in ministry or in a church together, or even as a family, and you can speak the same language and you understand what the other person is saying. It was, I wasn't looking for an out, but I was really saying, I don't know if I'm the right person. She says, I gotcha. So it was really cool to kind of see that. And it's like, no, you're on my mind for a reason, Ginger. We're going to press through this. I got you where you're weak, I'm strong. So that was kind of neat.
And whether that's ministry within the church or ministry within the home, I think both of those examples, you and the pastor's wife, and between the two of y'all, is a testament that the Lord brings people together to do
Mm-hmm.
together what they might not be able to do
Mm-hmm.
apart.
Yeah.
And we talk about that here all the time. And what I wanted from y'all too was to get your perspective on the other person as their spouse. So, Mom, how have you seen Dad use his spiritual gifts in y'all's relationship, in
Mm-hmm.
ministry, and even in your home?
Mm. So he's got the spiritual gift of leadership. And that is one of the qualities that attracted him to me in the very beginning when we met, and as we've grown in marriage through the different seasons of our relationship, is I absolutely know where Jay McSwain stands on issues. He leads he leads me, he leads our family in the ways of the Lord. His convictions are very clear. And that gives me, as a woman and as a wife, a great deal of security and safety. I know what his character is based on, in this case, his spiritual gift of leadership. I think that would be true in other relationships based on someone's spiritual gift. You just know their character and who they are based on the way God has designed them. I believe as a father, the same thing. I knew his passion for you and for Maggie, your sister. And even if I was off the rails a little bit for whatever reason, um, he was good and not always gentle, but he was good to get us back on track. But that's what needed to be done. And then in ministry and in ministry, but let me go first vocationally. Women, there is nothing better as a wife for your husband to come home from work and to be happy and to be fulfilled. And I think that is the greatest joy, one of the greatest joys we have had in our marriage, or I have had as a wife, is knowing that Jay is getting to do exactly what God has designed him to do. And in his case, it is vocationally, but even when he was working with the family business, ministry, same thing. It filled his cup so much. He was so happy. He was so excited. He had other things to think about, not just sitting in front of the TV or back in these days waiting for AOL to connect. You
Mhm.
know, we still have AOL IDs. But yeah, he's just so fulfilled. So seeing that strength and him demonstrating for 34 years that leadership, his spiritual gift of leadership has permeated every area of his life. And you and I, Mary, and your sister are the benefactors of that as our family, but so are countless people that he goes and sees and loves on, or, you know, it's just a joy. It is a joy. And I don't know what he would say, but I think, and you might would say it too, when I get to do those things that God has designed me to do, I'm pretty, I'm in a good spot, you know? Um, so is that, did I answer your question?
You did, you did. So, Dad, I want to ask you the same question. How have you seen Mom use her spiritual gifts in her ministry, in her life, and even in our home?
Yeah. Well, the gift of helps, and I've watched her, like, when I've led in something, or I've kinda just said, "Hey, I'd like for these people to come and live with us." She just steps right up, and she's hesitant because she's an S personality, so sometimes she may not be overly enthusiastic. She's told me this before, or "That's as good as it gets." "Fine." I'll say, "How are you okay?" "I'm fine. That's as good as it gets." But what I've watched her with helps. You and I came home a few weeks ago from Chicago, and there's a family that, one of our baseball players that's very near to our family, that needed a place to stay until they kinda got settled here in Atlanta, and we were gone. Well, Mom was the one that made sure that the home was ready and everything was perfect, and when I walked in, the toy box where she'd bought toys and gone and gotten all the things from when y'all were kids that are still cool toys, it was her stepping up and undergirding my desire to have someone in our home to stay
Mhm.
with the gift of hospitality. And so I've seen that in that way, but I've also seen just in the shepherding part, as she's like with you guys, it's always about being kind. It's always about that person that has stepped out a little bit, and y'all getting to see the example of her being a shepherd to a lot of people that God's put in her path. So that'd be for me.
So, Mom, I want to ask you, and y'all both spoke to this a little bit. That example that you gave was one of the ones that I was even thinking of how y'all's gifts complement one another. Because with your spiritual gift of hospitality, that's wanting people to feel welcome, whether that be in the space you encounter them in at church, but also welcoming people into your home. And y'all have given multiple examples of this, of having people over for dinners, of having people live with us, which I know that happened a lot in those first 10 years. And it's happened a few times since Maggie and I were born, which we can
We've
remember.
had to be a little more careful with it, but yes, it has
You don't have
happened.
as many rooms to offer
That's right.
anymore. We were filling them up.
Yeah.
But with your gift of hospitality and leading in that way, but even with your gift of helps and shepherding, I see how those complement one another so well. And y'all didn't need a language for that, because you said earlier, you didn't talk about it. You just naturally learned how to support one another, and it came so naturally. And yet now you have a language for how the Lord has specifically gifted you, that you've been able to complement one another in ministry, and even the ministry that you've brought into your home. But Mom, I wanted to ask you, not from experience, but rather instruction. I have been told that one of the roles of the wife is to affirm and encourage and support her husband in ministry and life, and also to partner and to come alongside. So how have you been able to do that through your gifts, but also just through life experiences?
I think it probably goes back to what I said, a minute ago, is when I ultimately see Jay fulfilled and excited, and I see him in action, and I see how happy he is, it does make it easier to do it again the next time. It is true with a SC personality, I'm more behind the scenes. I have to think, I'm slow, I want it right. And so sometimes I overthink and I can discourage myself, where your dad just jumps in and does it. That's both his personality and his spiritual gift in terms of hospitality here. But I am a processor, and sometimes I can overthink a situation and rob the joy in what we're getting to do. However, I have said it time and time again. I believe it for myself, and I believe it for others, that no matter what it takes to get you to the point that you get to finally do the ministry, after the ministry event is over and you reflect and you say, would I do it again? And if the answer is yes, then that's your place. I remember I really realized this when I got to love on a group of college graduates, a group of girls, and we would meet every Thursday night. And you and your sister you were third and fourth grade. So your sister 2 years older, and all the way up through middle school, I got to spend time with these girls. And I'll be honest and transparent, because I know other people really do think and feel this. Oh, I hope they call me tonight and say they're going to reschedule. Oh, I don't want to drive all the way downtown Atlanta tonight. I mean, I'm just being real, you know? But a lot of times, they wouldn't cancel. I would go on down there. I would be happy the moment I saw them. The joy would take over. And then I would get to my car at the end of the night, and I would be like, thank you, Lord. This was the best night ever. So a lot of times I think some people can overthink and make it hard on the one that has the gift of hospitality or the gift of leadership, and your personality kicks in and you start asking a lot of questions, or do you want this? Do you want that? Are you sure? And we can rob their joy and frustrate them. But I believe, and I know that if you just yield in to how God has wired the other person, and help their dreams come true, and help them fulfill what God has called them to do, and just die to yourself, just get over it. So it's the reward is there. It's very fulfilling.
What I love about that story, and we talk about it all the time when we talk about spiritual gifts, we talk about you all the time when
I've
we
heard.
teach on those. But one of the things I love about that story is it's such a beautiful picture of the shepherd,
Mm,
of being a shepherd and shepherding those group of girls. People with the gift of shepherding want to look after the spiritual and the emotional well-being
mhm,
of an individual or a group of people. But when some people would look at that, they would think, "Oh, she's their teacher."
mm-mm,
And that's not one of your spiritual gifts, but we even talked about this earlier today. It's not just about the gift that you have, but the gift tells you how you might fulfill a role that you're called
yes,
to, how you might pursue a group of people that you're passionate about. And
mhm,
even talking about y'all's spiritual gifts together, that is not the same formula of every single couple that's going to be
mhm,
listening to this or that is ever married. But again, the Lord brings people together to do together what they might not be able to do apart.
right,
And there are ways that each combination, each dynamic can complement one another.
mhm,
And y'all learned through experience, through living it out, but then through the affirmation of discovering your gifts and knowing your personality, having a language for that, you're able to speak into the other person's life. You're able to see how the Lord brought you together to complement one another in the
mhm,
same way that people listening aren't going to have that exact formula,
right,
but they can start to see how they can support and encourage the other person's ministry, pursue their own ministry, but also support the ministry of the other person because they have a language for that, because they can affirm and encourage that in the other person, which is why even that specific example, but everything y'all talked about tonight, I think exemplifies that it's not about the specific formula. It's not about what an assessment says, but how the Lord has gifted and wired you to do together and to be more together and to help the other person pursue what they're passionate about and to encourage and affirm them to pursue what makes them feel effective and fulfilled, and also to be able to do it together because
mhm.
the Lord has brought the two of you together in marriage, but also in ministry.
Yeah.
I think I've heard you say this when we would do engaged couples and even with singles, that when you first meet and you fall in love, that attraction, that chemical reaction, that is it's natural and it stays in place for 3 to 5 years. I mean that energy. But part of that energy, it's not only the relationship, but if you're a believing couple, it's also the Holy Spirit that is, maybe even drawing you together. So it's not just the physical or the personality side of us, but God's at work knitting together and planning out the future based even on your spiritual gifts. And so, as you said, not every couple may have leadership and shepherding or helps, but whatever God has a way and the purpose and plan He has for couples of complementing the different spiritual gifts of that couple in order to fulfill the plan they have for them as a couple in parenting and in ministry within the church or the community. Um, so I think we can't neglect it, or we can't lose sight of who really is ultimately in charge, and that is God. And He is and will, if we let Him and if we'll yield in, He will blend the spiritual gifts, the personality. He will even bring awareness to something that I don't hear y'all talking about too much. And as the co founder of Place, I'm a little concerned about the other elements. But when we get into like the abilities portion or the environment,
Well, we'll move into those at some
well,
point.
but that's so important because, Jay and I are both social. We both love people, and being in those environments. But there are other parts to us where he's easy to step into to crowds, and I'm a little bit more hesitant unless I know there's an emergency, or unless I know there's something to do. And so you even have to learn that about each other to give each other that space or to respect where, yes, I'm social and I love people, but I may be hesitant to do this, or this because the other elements of place don't work out, or not there. But but it's a whole picture, of course, and it's learning through time together your strengths and weaknesses, and really realizing that it's God that was intentional and putting the couple together. And it's learning to respect and support both what the other one is, how the other one's designed, but also how the other one isn't designed. But we can definitely make choices in supporting one another.
Mary, she said it is she used the word time, and we have gone a little bit longer than we normally do. So we
Well, there's three
probably,
of us. Is that not okay?
oh, three. So
Yeah.
if we normally try to keep it at 30 minutes, 15 minutes each, we could do 45, which is about what we're going to end up with today. But we do need to probably wrap it down, and uh, you always do a good job of kind of summarizing everything. So
I had a feeling that we'd go over a little bit, but I knew that we had to take advantage of having Mom here with us today and just absorb all of the wisdom and knowledge that y'all have individually and together, because I knew that it would be edifying and encouraging for people to listen to. So, with that being said, to wrap up our conversation today, what would be y'all's advice to people who are married, who are in seasons of engagement or seasons of evaluation as they look to the person that they're considering or the person that they have chosen? What would be your advice to them as they look to see how they can do ministry together and how they can support the individual's ministry as well?
I would say real simply, complement one another, because most of the time God brings people together that are a little bit different,
Mhm.
and we can either allow that to complement or conflict. And so take your differences and use them to complement, as I feel like we've done, and not allow them to conflict.
And with the seasons of life, the complementing, um, the complementing differences, they'll they'll ebb and flow during the different seasons of life. We were had a shared passion for the first 10 years of our life because we were both doing ministry, singles ministry. Then um, about the time place hit the ground, was when God finally said yes after 6 years and gave us your sister. So I got to do my dream of being a mom, but then he got to do his dream of place ministry. And so there were some changes because we still had a shared passion for our children and place, but our time was different and our involvement in each of those areas were different. And that took some adjustments and some respect and some kindness um and just helping the other one understand, what each one was going through and respecting that. And then even the other season of, you and your sister, um, going off to college. And now I have more time to get back into ministry. And what does that look like? It's not necessarily with Jay, but where is that? So I think, but he's so good at being mindful of the way God has made me and helping me navigate and reminding me. So I think being mindful of the seasons of life and remember the strengths and even the weaknesses of the other person and come alongside them to help and encourage them, your spouse.
That is such a good word to the seasons, because our entire conversation today, there are so many different seasons of
Mm-hmm.
y'all's marriage, but the common denominator was the two of y'all and the Lord and the way that He has wired you. And He's used that in different ways in different seasons. But whether y'all have been doing ministry together or supporting the other person's ministry, He has still kept you together to
Yes.
do ministry together or support the other person's
Mm-hmm.
ministry, to be more effective or support the fulfillment of the other person's pursuit of their passions. And I think that is such a beautiful picture. You summed it up so well, is to give grace and support to whatever season of life that you're
Yes.
in, because your ministry to one another remains the same, even if the ministry that you pursue looks different in different seasons of life.
Thank you.
So, Mom, thank you for being on the podcast with
Thank
us today.
you.
I hope this was an encouraging conversation for y'all. If you did find it encouraging, share it with your friends who are married, who are in seasons of engagement or seasons of evaluation as they consider who the Lord might be bringing alongside them to do ministry. If you're curious about what your spiritual gifts are, we have a spiritual gifts app, the My Spiritual Gifts app, which we can put in the description of this podcast. So you can discover your spiritual gifts. We have a personality app where you can discover your personality, and you can start to have this affirming and encouraging language for whoever the Lord has brought alongside you in this season of your life and in the next. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you back here next time.